Thank you, dude. Well, I'll tell you what, I left you last week and I said I was going to show you a particular sin in the Bible that it said that he that commits this has, and I quote, denied the faith. Talking about if a believer does it, he's denied the faith and he's worse than an infidel, worse than someone who's never heard it at all. Doing this is labeled by Paul as a sin that most identifies a Christian as being a tare in the wheat. As a matter of fact, he's going to say of this virtue in counterpoint that, and I quote, about the person that does it, let them first learn to practice piety in regard to this area. It's the first act of piety that you start off, and if you miss it, you got to go back to go. Where is it? It's a particular attribute that it said that it is pleasing to God when a person has it. It is very displeasing not to. It's a particular attribute, but if you don't have it, as a matter of fact, I saw in 60 Minutes one time, a secular little segment did a special on the absence of this, and even the world loathes it whenever you see it. I want to show it to you in 1 Timothy chapter 5. In just the third and fourth verses. 1 Timothy is the first of the pastoral epistles and how the church is run. And one of the big areas in the church among the people of God is the care of the weak. And especially in Paul's day, and even so in ours, one of the weakest of people, as mentioned in Old and New Testament, is that of the widow and the orphan. And so within the church of Jesus Christ, how do you take care of a widow? 1 Tim 5. Now you just follow it with me. Heck, I don't even know if we're going to go that long tonight. This is a pretty short little text. I hope to get us out a little bit early because I want you to be able to do something, to act on this. In 1 Timothy 5, in verse 3, Timothy says, honor widows, or Paul says to Timothy, honor widows who are widows indeed, that are true widows. And what the idea of honoring has is that of money. If you look at the same idea in verse 17, an honor or an honorarium quite often is ipso facto, a synonym with money, taking care of somebody. In 1 Tim 5:17, let elders who rule well be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who labor at the word in preaching. And there again, the word honor would have the idea of money. You saw in the book of Acts, in Acts chapter 6, there was a dispute in the early church over the care of certain widows, that the church had taken under their wing widows that were in the body, and certain Greek-speaking widows or Hellenistic widows were being overlooked. There was kind of a racial discrimination, and so that was dealt with. So the early church from Acts 6 and on had a job to take care of the widows. So Timothy said, or he says to Timothy in verse 3, honor widows, meaning financial care. Does your church incidentally have a program for the taking care of widows? Every church should. You get a whole chapter on it. We have one guy in our church, his job is the widows. And he watches them, and he watches any needs that they have, physical, monetary, or otherwise. But in taking care of widows, Paul said that the church doesn't have the primary responsibility to widows. Actually, it's third in line. If you notice who takes care of widows in verse 16, if any woman who is a believer has dependent widows, let her assist them, and let not the church be burdened. So one person that could take care of widows in the church would be a woman that had a particular burden that she and her husband could open up their house and bring in a woman who didn't have anyone to take care of her. And they could look after her and care for her. So honor widows who are widows indeed, but a widow indeed is one that has no one to look after her. You see in verse 5, now she who is a widow indeed and who has been left alone has fixed her hope on God. And so that is what Paul is referring to. Not simply a woman whose husband has died, but a woman whose husband has died and there's no woman in the church to take care of her, and she is called a woman who has been left alone. Now, who has the first responsibility? A widow, a woman in the church is someone who can take care of them. And then there's another person in line, and then if they can't, then the church takes care of them. And the church looks after their needs. But in verse 4, I want to show you who the first priority is: to take care of Momma. Verse 4. If any widow has children or grandchildren, let them, meaning the children, first learn to practice piety in regard to their own family. Now what that means is, Timothy, if there is a woman in the church whose husband has died, the church doesn't have the primary responsibility to take care of her. If any widow has children or grandchildren, let those children first learn piety in regard to Momma. The first act of piety that a Christian boy or girl has, us, is not to the body of Christ. Our first area of piety is not to missions, it's not to discipleship. It's not to the lost, it's not to the world, it's not to the poor. The first area of piety we have is in the home. As a matter of fact, an elder is told in 1 Timothy chapter 3, if any man cannot care for his own family, how will he manage the household of God? That I have to take care of my wife and children first. And this is not speaking here of a father to his children, it's speaking of children to their, specifically mothers, because generally a father can take care of himself a little bit more. Besides that, most of you guys are going to go before your wives dying. That's just the way it is. I've told you before, I speak to a lot of retirement homes, and you'll always have 30 women and one guy who don't know where he is. All right? Women just outlive men. Women just kind of flex in life and they move. Men are kind of static fellows that jerk along in life until they implode and you bury them. All right. And as I said, spend his IRA on a younger man and go to Cancun. All right. So be encouraged, fellas. All right. That's why I always grieve about I have so much retirement. I am worth so much dead. It's incredible to my wife. Verse 4, if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them, the kid, learn to practice piety in regard to their own family, and specifically the family is talking about Momma. Your first act of holiness as a Christian child is to Momma, is to make sure that your mother is taken care of. And then Paul goes so far as saying this in the rest of the verse, very interesting. He's going to get specific about what it means to practice piety, because a lot of us as Christians, we can keep our piety up here in piety in the sky, so to speak. Paul gets very specific. Verse 4, and to make some, meaning the children. Now, the New American Standard has the word return. To make some children return to their parents. I think that is a bad translation. If you have a New International, you don't have the word return, do you? You have the word recompense. And where else that word occurs in the New Testament, that's what it means. It means to pay back. And so here's the way I think the text reads. Timothy, take care of widows who are truly alone and have no one else. But in verse 4, don't take care of these widows. If any widow has kids, let those kids exercise the first area of obedience as Christians, and that is Momma. And make those children apodidomai. Make them pay back Momma. That's what it means. Because in verse 4, This, meaning the piety of a child to Momma, is pleasing in the sight of God because it is the fifth commandment. Children, honor your parents. It's pleasing for a child to do that. That's what honor means. So what is the sin here? That Paul says in verse 8, if anyone doesn't provide for his own, especially those of his own household, he has denied the faith and he's worse than an infidel, an unbeliever. How many of you fellows ever heard that verse quoted and thought that was talking about your taking care of your wife and children? That's true. Generally. Specifically, this is not talking of a husband toward his family. It's talking of a child to his or her mother. A child that says they are a Christian and will let their widowed mother suffer has categorically renounced Christianity. It is as if they have never known the Lord, and they are worse than an unbeliever. An unbeliever merely rejects the gospel. Someone that does this is a false Christian that has renounced what they said was their faith. It's an evil term toward a child that will not look after Momma. Now, what does that mean, to repay Momma? Y'all ever heard that story about the little boy that was trying to earn some money and he couldn't find enough money? And so one day at breakfast he billed his mother and he said, Mom, for taking out the trash, $2.50, for making my bed, $1.50, for sweeping out the car, $3. And he went down. He figured out how he could earn some money. And the mother just looked at that little note and didn't say anything. Next day he comes to breakfast. And Momma has a note right there for him. For preparing your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, no charge. For keeping your house clean, no charge. For washing your clothes, no charge. For staying up with you when you were sick, no charge. For going through 16 hours of labor, no charge. Let them practice piety in regard to Momma and to make some children apodidomai, pay back Momma. Do you think if your mothers kept a running tab, you think you'd be in a heap of trouble? You think you'd be driving a scooter right now? If you think that if your mother did to you what Texas Tech did on your school loan, or LSU, or Baylor, do you really think that you could survive? If you paid your mother minimum wage, do you think you could survive? If you paid her what you did a cook or a housekeeper, do you think you'd have to be doing some paying back? How much does it cost to change a diaper? Son. What's it cost to a kid who pukes all night with a 24-hour virus and has diarrhea to boot, and your Momma took care of all of those things? As a matter of fact, y'all have heard the different kinds of love. Agape, God's love; phileo, brotherly love; eros, erotic love. Do you know there's another type of love that we never talk about that the Greeks used? It was called stergain, S-T-E-R-G-E-I-N, stergain love. And it was a mama's love. And as a matter of fact, we have given that name to a particular bird that had such a care of her children that the bird was universally pictured as bringing children to the parents, a stork. The word stork is from the term stergain, and it's the care of a mother of her child. Now that's the idea, that a child is raised and cared for by Momma, but there comes a time when that child turns around and now he's the one that has to practice care. My brother and I have three brothers, there's four of us, and my father passed away in 81, and my mother visited with her one day, and she was really concerned during one of the elections years ago because they were talking about canceling Social Security and this and that. And I said to Mother, you know, If they do or if they don't, Mama, that might save you or cost you a few $100s. But your security is not the government. I said the government has no biblical responsibility to you. I said that's my job, and that's Bobby's job, and Billy's job, and Jimmy's job. We're going to take care of you. And we all got together, all of us, and we went and got my mother wanted to live where she was in the house that we grew up in, and we took a $10,000 loan out, and we fixed our home up. So that old home that I grew up in, we fixed it so nice. And we foot the bill, and we paid that thing off. My mother got tired of driving, the car. It was getting down, and she wanted one of them old lady cars. Give the old ladies that'll reach from about here to them trees right there. And so we went and got Mama one of them old lady cars. And she loves it, and we take care of that. When it comes, and we all send her money every month. And there's a lot of things, I'm not that wealthy, there's a lot of things I could use that money on. But I have a responsibility to first practice holiness to my mother. I can't come in and teach you. I can't sit up and teach our church with all these people. None of you brought me into the world. None of you has of yet changed my diaper. None of you has yet, I don't know, when I get to be an old cat, who knows? One of you girls might be in health care, and I might be right there. But up till now, ain't nobody changed my diaper but Mama. And I've only had one other woman that I know who cooks for me. And so my Mama has taken care. So my first act of piety is to take care of my mother. And so I send her money. And we just kind of get on the phone. She lives down in Waco. We live in Marlin and Plano and Fort Worth and Denton respectively. So we all get on the phone just periodically. How you doing, Mom? And she always acts like there's no problem. But we listen. And then we get on the phone, start talking around, and we take care of Mother. And so even though Mother has her money coming in, and my father had a little bit of retirement. He was a civil servant. He never made over about $500 a month his whole life. But we take care of my mother, because I can't talk to you if I let my mother down there go hungry. As a matter of fact, a few years ago, I think it was 60 Minutes, had a special on Miami Beach on northern families that would take their parents and send them to Miami Beach to die. And they would be sometimes wealthy northern husbands and wives that would send Mama down there and their fathers, and they would just barely survive down there and get along. And the world did a special on the abomination of an ungrateful boy or an ungrateful girl. We take care of our parents. Let me hit you with about 4 things here about taking care of parents. Put down number 1, that you and I, as children, have to recognize a divine responsibility from the Bible that we have to our mother, specifically to our mother. I was in St. Joe, Missouri one time teaching, and there was this dear mother and her 2 daughters, and they were missionaries, and they had her husband, their father, and Alzheimer's had just run its course through this man, and he was like a little boy that they would take around, and he couldn't do a lot of things himself, and he was slowly going down. And I'll never forget seeing this very pious wife and these pious daughters. These girls, ladies, would put their arms around their daddy, who didn't even know who they were, and would just hug their daddy. And I'll never forget this blue-eyed girl saying to me, he loved us and took care of us all through our lives. And they said, isn't it wonderful now that God has given us a chance to take care of him, that we return that love to him? Well, I don't know if they were thinking of the verse, but they could have said, to make some recompense their parents. Now, they were taking care of him. As a matter of fact, let me lay something on you. When Jesus Christ was dying on the cross, do you remember the last words of Christ? What was the trivia question? The last act that the righteous man did before he entered into the atonement. What is the last act act that a holy child has to do. It's to take care of Mama. What was it that Jesus Christ said just before 3 hours of darkness as he was slain for a world of lost sinners? It's a powerful statement. He did what the Old Testament said a righteous Jew had to do. He looked down at Mary and he said, "Woman, behold thy," and he, speaking of John, "Woman, behold thy son." He didn't say to her, "Woman, I'm giving care of you to John." He didn't have to say that. All he had to say was, "Woman, behold thy son." Because that's the job of a son, is to take care of Mama. Meaning, this is now your son, and his job is to take care of me. Fellows, the last act our Lord did is he took care of his mother. He's a 33-year-old man, and he made sure that his mother was taken care of after he died. And you know what? You go to Acts chapter 1, there at Pentecost, and the coming of the Spirit of God and the birth of the church, and there you see Mary was there. So they took care of her. And that's the last act that you have to do when your mother is alive, is to look after her. The godly Ruth, ladies, how many of you have ever heard that statement at weddings? Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your God will be my God, your people my people. That isn't spoken of a wife to a husband. It's spoken of a daughter to her mother-in-law. That she says, I'll be faithful to you. And you go to the book of Ruth and you see the godly Boaz bestow upon Ruth this grain, and she takes that grain and goes home and gives it to Mama. Ruth takes care of mother. The chief apostle in the New Testament, Peter, who does he bring Jesus to take care of and to heal in his home? His mother-in-law, to care for her. Jesus, Ruth, Peter. God makes sure that we see that godly people take care of mothers later on in life. So recognize your responsibility. Your mother may have her husband's retirement, and that's good, but she needs to know that you're there for her. It's your job. Secondly, you need to plan. I'm about to send both of my sons out. One's up in Fort Riley, Kansas. You can sleep well tonight. My son stands watch over our country. No wicked person has got any farther than Tulsa because he is there. And my other son is about to turn 17. Next year he'll be a high school senior and he'll be gone. My wife and I have this big house we built onto it years ago, and it's got 5 bedrooms, 3 baths, and we had thought about what are the two of us going to do rattling around in this house. But we have chosen to stay there for now. And the reason is that I've told my mother, even though you like your home that we grew up in, that Mama, if you ever want to, the whole west side of our house, it's essentially a house in itself, it's yours. And if we have to put in your own little kitchen, we'll put in your own little kitchen. Now, my mother is a frontier kind of woman. She said, oh, no, I don't need that. But at least she knows that her son's there always. And that's a good feeling to a mother. So you need to plan when you get married. That's an issue you want to talk, ladies, with your future husband, is how you're going to take care of your mother and how the two of you are going to take care of his mother. And it may be a grandparent. So that's a job that we have. Plan. Thirdly, you need to communicate. Like I say, even though that a mother may have her husband's retirement and she may have all kind of money coming in, there's something about love with skin on it. That kid is there for her. And let me tell you something, and as a pastor, having to work with the elderly, old people get scared. The book of Ecclesiastes says of the aged, it says they're afraid of the road and of a high place. When people get old, they get nervous, especially a man. When your father gets old, when we're men, we rely on our strength. We think we can do all this stuff. And when you get old, your strength is gone. And it's a frightening thing. When a woman loses her husband, her protector isn't there anymore. And so even if your father has taken care of your mother greatly, you need to talk to your mother and talk to your brothers and sisters. And say, we've got a job, and you need to communicate to your mama. God has told me to first practice piety to you and to pay you back. Oh, you don't need, I know you don't, because mamas are always negating themselves. Now, you might have a mama that'll say, dish it out, babe, right now. But I doubt most of them are going to have moms going to kind of, oh, you don't need to do that. You use the money. That's the way my mother does. But it feels so good for her to know that her boy is there. And it'll make your mother feel good. I don't know how many of you have ever told your mother, Mom, I'm here for you. And the chances are that most of y'all's mothers are in their 60s, maybe some of them in the 70s. You've got to tell them, I'm here to take care of you. I'm going to look out for you. So when you go planning your budget, there wants to be an amount of money that you're thinking of that you can always give to your mother. And my wife and I give to her just like we would any noble cause to take care of her. Y'all ever read that great New Testament scholar, Irma Bombeck? I love to read her. And she had an article one time that grabbed me so much. She said that she was driving down the street with her elderly mother, taking her out, looking after her, and that's another thing you have to do. And somebody pulled in front of her, and she hit the brake. And Irma said that as soon as she did it, she reached over and grabbed her mother, just like this. And she said she stopped and looked at her mother, and her mother looked at her, and there was something that transpired between them. And she said there's a time that it transpires with every child and his mother. That at that point, Irma, the child, became the parent, and the parent became the child. That she now had to take care of her mother, and the mama looked at her, and she looked at her mama, and it was like an acceptance of roles. And that time's going to come for your mother. So, communicate. Talk to them. Let them know that you're there. They get scared. Fourthly, you need to understand something. And that is the understanding of how your mother feels, and if your father is alive, how he feels about your care of them. I speak at a place in Denton, and I love to go there. It's called Fair Havens, and it's a retirement community. Not an old folks' home, but a retirement community. And when I go there, I notice something about these ladies. There's one guy, like I say, and then there's all of these silver-haired, bright-eyed women. And they are so sharp and so smart. And after I speak, we go and we have cake, okay? And so I sit, and they kind of all adopted me, you know. And I sit with them, and it's one of my favorite times during, every couple of months I'll go talk on a Thursday. And you know what these women love to do? They'll bring little artifacts and show me of what their children sent them. One 95-year-old lady from Abilene had this little vase with a flower in it. It was a pretty little vase. She said, my daughter got this for me. And she went into telling me this was made back in 1950, and they're not that easy to get. And she bought it, and it cost pretty good, and she got it and could have kept it, but she gave it to me. And you could see her just kind of do like that, because that was her, as she grows old, that was her glory, was in the glory of her daughter. And the glory of her daughter is that my daughter loves me. And look what my daughter did. And these women will talk about their children that come and visit them. And when their kids come, they like to say, come on over here, I want you to meet this man, Pastor Nelson. And they want me to meet their child. And they'll say to me, every other Friday, he comes up here from Fort Worth and he takes time off. And he takes me out and we go to eat. And she's so proud of that because the glory of a parent is their child. And the final glory to that child is that they practice piety to Mama. As a matter of fact, I wish you fellas could see it. There's an old guy in that study, and he died a few years ago. His name was Wes. Very successful inventor Union Carbide, something like it. He was an inventor, and he was really a sharp guy. And I would start talking about children, and I would watch this old man. He had one child, and the child had neglected him. And that child lived in Fort Worth, and he wouldn't come to see him because he was busy. And I watched old Wes, and this man would put his head down and he would cry. And they, to this day, are the most bitter tears I've ever seen a man cry at the lack of piety in his son, who wouldn't come to see his aging and soon-to-die daddy. And he died, and that boy never came, never looked after him. Deepest pain than you can have. That's how your parents feel. Your care of them is their final glory. The letters you write to your mother, the chances are your mother will take them and show them all around because she's so proud of the love of her daughter to actually think about her mother late in life. And there is no greater pain than you see than those old people waiting by the door and nobody comes and nobody cares. First, practice piety there. Any of you ever see that movie just a while back? It was so good. Richard Harris and Robert Duvall wrestling Ernest Hemingway. Great. It wasn't a real well-known movie, but it had two great actors. And let me tell you what that was about. Richard Harris is kind of a crazy old guy who has wasted his life in immorality and debauchery, and he's never grown up, and he's still kind of crazy. And he still thinks back to when he was a sailor and he wrestled back in Cuba, Ernest Hemingway, at a bar. And he's always talking about that because he doesn't want to get old. And he's always, old guys trying to do push-ups, always trying to do sit-ups. He's about 190 years old, but he's always trying to keep his body together, and bragging about his conquest. But his life has slipped away. And he's got this other buddy, this fastidious kind of Felix Unger, old barber that left Cuba during the revolution, is Robert Duvall. And he's a very responsible, single fellow. Okay? And Richard Harris has one thing that he clings to, because the only thing that he hasn't made a fool of in his life is that he has a son who's out there. And his son, every birthday, sends Richard Harris a gift. And the birthday comes up, and he sends his daddy a gift. You know what he sends him? It's the silliest looking hat you've ever seen. It's one of them Sherlock Holmes looking hat. It's got a bill here, and it's got a bill back here, supposedly to keep the sun off your neck. And here's his birthday. This guy's probably, in his mid-80s, and here his son sends him his yearly gift, and it's this hat, this tired-looking old gimme hat with two bills. And he looks at it, and you can see his heart kind of waver on the fence. He's not sure whether to cry or whether to say, at least he sent me a gift. And Richard Harris chooses, once again, denial, and he puts that hat on. Hot dang, a hat. And he's walking around in the movie with that silly-looking hat. And you feel for him. It's pathetic, because that's the only thing he holds to. He's lost his wives. He's lost his youth. He's lost his everything. He's made a fool of himself, and he has one thing, and that's a kid. And his kid's no good. Maybe. But there's one thing he holds to. Maybe his kid remembers him. And it's a pathetic thing, holding to a double-billed hat. And he and Robert Duvall, at the end of the movie, Robert finally confronts him about his foolishness and his embarrassing ways. And he just starts right at the top of Richard Harris, and he says, you're a drunk and you're an embarrassing old man, and this and this and this. And Richard Harris just kind of blows it off because he's so calloused, until Robert Duvall says the wrong thing. And he says, you're always talking about your son. What a good man he is. He said, what an irresponsible son you have. To only think of you at your birthday and to send you, not to even come see you, but to send you a present. And what does he send you? He sends you this silly-looking hat. And he grabs the hat off his head. He said, this is an ugly hat. It's a worthless hat. It's a cheap hat. It's a terrible gift. And boy, Richard wants to duke it out with him right there because he crossed the line. He crossed the only thing that this old man had, and that was the fact that his son cares about him. You know, I watched that movie and I thought, I had a lot of insight, and I thought, man, I don't want my mother at the end of her life grieving that she gave her life to 4 spoiled boys that took the life that they gave her, the rearing that she gave them, and went out and made their fortunes, and once ever so often will drop some FTD flowers. Thanks, Mom. I don't want my mother clinging to her worth by the yearly memory of an ungrateful son. And so I pretty well spoil my mother. And that's what you should do. It's what all of us should do. You see here how God sees it. For a child to use a mother and forget her when she needs him, even though they call themselves a Christian, they have denied the essence of piety, of responsibility, and of gratefulness. Have y'all ever told your mother that you loved her? When I became a Christian, I wrote my mother a letter and I thanked her for how she had raised me. I thought it would be a nice gesture. You know what she did? She framed it. That's how delighted she was that her boy remembered her. And I'm going to take care of her all the way until the end of her life, because now it's my turn. And there may come a day that my mother loses her cognition. There may be a day that she can't take care of her bowels, and I'm going to be the one either to do it or to have hospice care. A lot of the questions may come up, how about independent parents that don't want any help? They're not as independent as you think. You let them know you're there, even if they don't need you right now. You're there. Secondly, how about sorry parents? Because that's a fact. Some of you have exquisite parents. Some of you have parents that drop the ball on you. Well, I tell you what you can do. You can break the chain right now. And when the time comes that you have children, you can let your children watch you do. Be the kind of son that you want them to be someday. Oh, you think I don't preach this to my 2 boys? Son. It's my favorite text right here. Say, divvy up, guys. Daddy's getting it someday. Incidentally, how about some of you, I'm sure your thought goes around right now, I've got some brothers and sisters. You're supposed to share the load. And you kind of, incidentally, before you call your parents, you need to call your brothers and sisters. Say, we have a job. What if you have sorry brothers and sisters? Some of you do. You got lousy siblings. I'm sorry, but you may have to carry the load. There's nothing you can do. You have to do all that you can do. Some of you might think, what about old folks' homes? You know, those are a very benevolent thing. There's a lot of scams that take place in them. There's a lot of bad care. But the idea of a home that will give special care to parents, and some of you may have parents someday that you can't take care of their physical needs, and you may have to take care of it through hospice care, something like that. You need to be wise in where you put them. But if at all possible, you want to put them in your home. I'm going to take care of my mother as long as she wants to in her home with my money. And then if the time comes, I'm going to move her into my home. And if the time comes that I can't, that her health is endangered, I'm going to bring somebody in. And if the time comes that even that can't be round the clock enough, and my skills can't do it, then I might look at putting her at a nearby place that I can go and take care of her. My wife's grandfather is in a home that they can just go 15 miles away and take care of. The point is that they're there. And even if they're in an old folks' home, it's still sweet to know that son or daughter is always coming to see them, to care for them. That's your first responsibility. How many of you have ever told your mother that you're going to be there for her? What kind of lesson will you give to your children in their taking care of you? Folks, this used to be the way in our country that it was. You had mother, father, children, grandma. And some of you probably grew up in a home like that. Mother, father, children, grandma. And they took care. And we need to get that going again. We are Christians. And we don't live our lives according to the moral climate of our culture. We live it according to the Bible. And the Bible says, church, honor widows who have been left alone. But the first job is the child. You call your mother. We're a little bit early. You know what I'm going to do tonight? I'm going to pray. And when I get finished, I'm going to have Michael give us a little going home to call Momma music. And y'all are going to go home. And you know what I want you to do? I want you to call your mama. I want you to call your mother, and I want you to tell her that you love her. And I want you to tell her that as a Christian, you're going to be there for her. And a lot of you that have non-Christian mothers and fathers, this is going to be the greatest testimony you'll ever give them. This is our job. Don't be looking to evangelize, and don't be looking to disciple if you hadn't taken care of the womb that bore you. Just this last Christmas, I sent down a Christmas card to Lavelle Perry Nelson on Wynn Street. I bet you I've written that address 1,000 times. And just sent her a card, and I just put in an extra. I just gave her $300. And I said, just to offset Christmases, the gifts that you do. And I just gave her some money. I said, you just do whatever you want to with it. And I put a little note in it, in the card. And my mother, I talked to her a little while back, and she said, you know, thank you so much for what you sent. But she said, thanks so much for your note. She said, I read it and I cried. It was just a little phrase that I put in there. You know what made my mother cry? I put, Mom, enjoy this money and know that it's a small gift that I can give to you, because everything that I am is because of the mother that you were. And that was the greatest gift I could give her. This woman that gave her life, and nobody cares on our planet, nobody cares that my mother raised 4 boys, except the boys she raised. And if I forget her, then there's no one that's there for her. And there is no more bleak prospect for a woman than her children to forget her. Now you go home and you call your mama. Is your mama right now living her life outside of the knowledge that you love her? Bad boy. You bad girl. You go home and call mama, and you love her. Well, let's stand and we'll pray, and we'll be dismissed. Our Father and our God, I pray for all of us here. I pray for some of these here who don't have mothers. God love them that they have preceded them in death. And I pray that you might give them a special unction and a special encouragement. Pray, Father, for Steve Wilson here tonight. I know that just today lost his father. And now Steve has a new responsibility in life, the care of a mother. I pray, Father, for many of these whose mothers have slowly and surely become their children, and they are very aged. And I pray that they might communicate to them, no matter how well that mama did. I pray for these that didn't have good mothers, that you might give them, Lord, grace to obey you simply because of the Bible and not because of the constraint of a mother's memory, as we long for our children to remember us. But most of all, Lord, I pray for the great majority here who have mamas that did the best they knew how, that had a limited knowledge of child rearing, and in all of their mistakes tried their best and still love them today. And maybe there's many of these that have never seen this text and have never really realized the responsibility and the command of God that they have to take care of mama. And we are in a country today that has a government that seeks to do what the children have reneged upon. But we are Christians. And we long to give them the financial, the physical, and the emotional support that they need at this later part of their lives. And so help these to be good boys and good girls. And I'll thank you, Father, in the precious and holy name of him who said to his mother, "Behold thy son." And maybe these need to go, many of these, and simply to appear before a mother and to say, "Mother, behold thy son. Behold thy daughter.